This is Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show with Jen Vogel. Join Jen and her guests for this live discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Also available on podcast channels. This live stream is presented to you by Vox Pop Me, the leader in video research. Here's today's live conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show. We're live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and the podcast version will be available on all major podcast channels soon. We've talked in the past about how to pick your technology on an episode with Kari Campbell. The link to that episode is in the notes if you want to listen to it again. Today, we wanted to dive into this topic again with the chief MarTech officer out there. So Scott Brinker has been tracking the MarTech landscape for years and is joining me today on the show. Really looking forward to talking about it with him. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Jen. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah.
Lovely spring day to be talking MarTech.
It is a lovely spring day. Yes. Those of you who are followers of the show will notice I am bringing the show to you from our special outdoor studio today to try to avoid some background noise happening indoors. But yeah, we figured we'd take advantage of the nice weather and talk a little bit about MarTech.
Sounds good. So where do we begin?
Where do we begin? Well, I'd love to hear just like a brief overview of your journey in creating an overview of the MarTech field.
Yeah, I kind of fell into that entirely by accident. So I do feel like my career has always kind of been at this intersection between marketing and technology, which like 15 years ago was a very small niche content discussion area. But yeah, one of the things I started doing a little bit more than a decade ago was I was trying to convince chief marketing officers to hire more technical talent on the marketing team because they were becoming more and more dependent on technology to deliver the experiences and outcomes they needed. And so at one point in time, trying to persuade these skeptical CMOs about like, what do you mean? I'm in marketing. What do we need like technology for here? I put together that first graphic of just all the different technologies that even like 10 years ago in 2011, marketers were using. And it was something like 150 different technologies and tools. And everyone was like, oh my goodness, 150 MarTech tools. That's crazy. This thing has to consolidate. And it did not. So yeah, sort of since then, doing that graphic over a 10-year period, I mean, the one we did last year had 8,000 MarTech solutions on it. And that still is, it's nowhere near comprehensive, if you can believe that. So yeah, my career has always been kind of looking at this evolution of marketing and technology together. And boy, it's, the funny thing is for all the amazing stuff that's happened in these past 10 years, I feel like we're just getting started on what's going to happen for the road ahead. Yeah,
watching that sort of Lumascape evolve over the years and seeing going from 150 to 8,000. And, I think it's something a lot of most marketers are probably familiar with and have seen it and have experienced the shock of how technology has grown in the industry over the last 10 years. And yeah, every time you kind of look at all those logos and brands and different categories, it's a lot. And so I guess now the thought of having a marketer that doesn't have a tech focus seems obscure to me. So it's interesting that you were like at the forefront of trying to convince CMOs that technology skill set was important. But like, what does that mean to you today?
Yeah, and it's also important to recognize that, technology and marketing it's a very deep field. And there is no way that any one person can be like an expert in all of this. And so I've long said, not every marketer needs to be a technologist. But the two things that are really important is, first of all, everyone in marketing needs to feel at least comfortable working with technology. This has to be just a part of your continuous learning and professional development. But that it's really, really important to have people in the marketing team who become your experts on how you develop these technology capabilities for the rest of the marketing department. And so this is kind of where the marketing ops group, now sometimes they're part of this larger RevOps group. I've talked about them as marketing technologists. You can pick your label, but it's this idea of having people who are specialists focused on how do we leverage this technology to support the modern marketing organization.
Yeah, that makes sense, because there are a lot of elements of marketing that don't necessarily require that kind of deep technological experience, but being familiar and comfortable is really important. And so I guess how important is it to have a strong tech stack in order to be customer centric within your organization?
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful about our choice of words here. So I think you chose a really good adjective, strong tech stack. And I'm going to interpret that by meaning it's a tech stack that actually gives you the capabilities you need to serve your customers the way they want to be served. That doesn't necessarily have to be a big tech stack. I know we hear lots of, data. I've collected a fair amount myself showing, just the scale of tech stacks has gotten, quite large. But really, this is definitely a case where size is not the axis by which you want to evaluate, your success. It's like, is it helping you deliver the experiences you want for customers? And the truth is, right? I mean, there's so much of what we do with customers that's either directly served through a digital channel now. It's how they're engaging on our website. It might be the way in which we engage with them through email and the clicks they, have on messages there. It might be in advertising. It might be in social media. It might be through an app, and those are just the direct ways, the technology has become our conduit for engaging with customers. We also have all the indirect ways, that when people do actually call our sales organization or our customer success organization, and they're leveraging a CRM, or other, services, sales enablement, customer success enablement tools, having the marketing technology stack and the team that's running that be able to provide those capabilities, to those people who are, the technology is a little bit more indirect in that case, but still so critical to just connecting the dots across all of that customer experience. So I don't know, it's like this past year, like we were on a certain journey where I think everyone was already under the, belief that, okay, more and more of this is going to be digital. But yeah, the past year and all the craziness of the pandemic, that put us into this just warp speed jump forward and saying, okay, no, it's not just a lot of digital. It's like pretty much everything we're going to be doing in some form or another is going to be digital. And so I think at this point, hopefully we're collectively coming out of the craziness that was that year. But I don't see us going back on the digital side. That is all here to stay.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just having this conversation last week with a couple of other B2B SaaS marketers and trying to define why do people still talk about digital marketing? Like, what is not all marketing digital in some way, especially now. But I think what you said is really important about, it's not really like how big your tech stack is. It's like having the right pieces in place. And when you think about those 8,000 pieces of our tech that are available at minimum, I know just from my own experience, there's always a piece of tech out there that is shiny and exciting and could probably add a lot of value that is very attractive. And, there's an inclination to, let's sign on to that tech. Let's try that out. Let's implement it, when at the same time, we might only be leveraging 30% of a piece of tech that we have in place, and we can get so much more value from what we already have. So I know my team spends a lot of time evaluating the tech that we have and saying, hey, do we need to put a roadmap in place to get more out of the tech that we have, as opposed to buying something new, and making sure that what we have in place is right, and we're also maximizing the value, and not just piling more things onto the stack.
Oh, I absolutely love that approach. I can't endorse that strongly enough. I do feel like it is always important to find this balance. And, I mean, I'll use the ratio of like 80-20 or 90-10, but, you pick the ratio that's right for your company and your circumstances. But it's like you're absolutely right. You really do want 80%, 90% of your effort to be focused on how do you get the maximum value out of the tools you already have. Because very often the way we get value out of these tools has almost nothing to do with the actual technologies themselves. And it has to do with the strategy of how we're going to deploy them to customers. It has to do with how do we provide the enablement and training, to our broader teams to be able to harness this. How do we make sure we're running, continuous experiments to be able to optimize and improve, how these things are performing. I mean, all that is work, that really you can focus on with your existing tech stack and just get so much value out of it. But I always, the other side of it is, we are living in an age where the pace of technological innovation is just crazy. I mean, it's not even necessarily about marketing technology innovation. It's about just technology innovation in general. And the fact is, we as marketers, we have a very simple job. Our job is to be where the, customer is, where the consumer is. And so as, consumers, start adopting like, either new, social experiences, or they start going to other new kinds of digital properties, or they have an expectation of, what a state of the art, web experience is going to be like. As those expectations shift, it's very much our responsibility as marketers to make sure we're keeping pace with that, and so I always think it is good to like, keep 10% or whatever it is of, your effort to be open to just staying abreast of like, okay, what is changing? And that doesn't mean we have to chase every new shiny object that, flies across our vision, but it does mean we want to keep a close enough eye on it that every now and again, we're going to see something like, this piece actually might be very relevant to our audience, and it's probably worth doing some sort of experiment to test it out.
Yeah, I love that. There's a balance of, making sure you're being efficient and getting the most out of what you have, and also not missing out on the new stuff that could really add value. So who should be making those like ultimate tech stack decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be honest, I think at this point in time, tech stacks for marketing really do need to be a partnership between marketing, between possibly a broader revenue ops organization, and then the IT organization as well, too. And the reason why is, I mean, I definitely feel like the CMO ultimately has to take responsibility for delivering marketing outcomes, and so it's the responsibility of the CMO and whoever the CMO hires to support him or her in that process to make sure that they've got the right capabilities to be able to execute and deliver those outcomes. That being said, we live in a world where, the digital interactions with customers that are happening in marketing's domain bleed over so like fluidly into, sales and customer success. And if we've got a digital product, what's actually embedded in the product experience, that you can't do this in a silo. And so there are some tools you might get for marketing that are, okay, this is really only a marketing tool. It's only going to be used by marketers. That's fine. But when you start looking at larger platform solutions, the state of the art and things with, like CRMs or digital experience platforms or business intelligence tools or things like that. Yeah, you want to make sure marketing is advocating, for its needs in those solutions and has a seat at the table. But that should be a decision that is being made by a collection of people who all are going to leverage the same technology infrastructure.
I think that's so important too, because and I would say not just for the marketing technology that can be leveraged by other groups, but the other way around as well. Like there have been occasions where the sales group is buying into a new technology and I get a glimpse of it and I'm like, this is amazing. Marketing should be using this. Why are they not marketing this to marketers? Because, I'm going to get so much out of it. And that collaboration. And I think I've mentioned a couple times this role of RevOps is really a great bridge for technology between your customer success groups, your sales groups, your marketing groups, and making sure all of the different tech is integrated properly and being leveraged across all those different groups.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a really exciting movement. I feel like, they used to talk about like, what was it, like web years being like dog years or something like this. 7 years happen in 1 year. I kind of feel like that is the stage we're at right now with the digital customer portion of the modern organization. Is things are evolving just so rapidly. And I would say, yeah, by far the single most exciting trend to me is the fact that after years, this was such a cliche of like, well, there's sales and there's marketing and, the marketing throws things over the wall to sales and sales complains about that and then throws things over and marketing complains. This marketing like sales dichotomy was, it was almost a punchline for a decade. And then all of a sudden here, in just the past couple years, and I think the term RevOps and the concept of RevOps has been an incredible catalyst for this. All of a sudden, you've actually now got sales and marketing teams working really closely together, and the technology layer that is spanning across them has become one of the enablers for that. So yeah, this whole like, okay, let's stop pointing fingers at different things and find a way to really collaborate, on just kicking butt competitively, with our customer experience. It's just a wonderful time to be working in marketing and MarTech.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, a lot of our customers, the insights teams that we work with, or our audience, the people who are listening to the show right now, they've got tech stacks in place, right? And so how do you go about the initial like evaluating your existing tech stack to make sure it's meeting your needs?
Yeah, there's sort of two ways to look at this. One side is from the tech end and then one side is from the customer end. The customer end is the most important. And so what I always recommend is doing, this is a big project, but it is so valuable to do it, is really map out the end-to-end customer journey. And I've seen people do these maps and they would like take up an entire wall. They're huge, but they're so valuable. You're looking at all the different kinds of touch points that customers have at different stages of their, process. And again, it isn't entirely linear from a customer perspective. People hop around and go back and forth. But again, for a moment, just oversimplify a bit to at least just map it out in a way that you can identify all those touch points and think about like, okay, well, what's the expectation of the customer here? What's best in class, what they would want there? How good are we at measuring this, at that particular stage? Like what happens if something goes wrong? What's sort of the exception management at each one of these stages? Who's the responsible party, for this particular stage? What are the tools? And so you start to map this all out, and I think very quickly you'll see possibly where there's either gaps or redundancies, or opportunities to improve. And so when you've got that view, the technology is a part of it, but, the real value of that is really starting to understand, that end-to-end customer journey. On the technology side, the truth is almost every organization now has much more technology than they even recognize. I've had so many of these cases where, we'll go in and we'll talk to a group about like, okay, well, what tools do you have in your stack? And the CMO will be like, well, we just have 2 tools. Yeah, we use HubSpot for this and we use Adobe thing for that. And yep, we're all set. And then you start like digging and then like, oh yeah, well, we use this other thing for our content marketing. And yeah, we're doing this for social monitoring here. And oh yeah, we've got all the ad tech solutions over here. And next thing you know, there's like 20 tools on the table and they're like, oh yeah, I guess we actually do have a MarTech stack. The thing that's kind of cool is there's become a whole category of products out there called SaaS management platforms. And these are tools like Blissfully and Tori, Torii, and Better Cloud and Clean Shelf. And these are tools that have been developed to help companies map out all of the different technologies that they're using, not just in their MarTech stack, but in their broader business tech stack, and help to start to keep track of like, what are all these different subscriptions and who's the person who's responsible for them? And do we have redundancies? Do we have zombie tools that we're paying for that we're not using? And so from a technology perspective, I think it's really valuable to like pick one of these tools and use it to just start to get that map of like, okay, what is actually in our tech stack? And then start to map that with the customer journey exercise that you did to say, okay, what can we eliminate? What, if anything, do we need to add? And then I guess the phrase for it is called rationalizing your MarTech stack. Let's get it rationalized so you've got the right tools for the right job, not much else.
I mean, we're in like a totally different era when you need a piece of MarTech to manage your MarTech stack. I'll be honest, I didn't even know these things existed, but it just speaks to exactly the challenge and the opportunity that we have of like all these amazing pieces of technology that we can leverage, that we are leveraging. And we actually now need technology to manage all the technology, which is amazing.
It was funny. We have a marketing ops leader at HubSpot who had adopted one of these tools and like mapped out all the technologies. And he shared the list with me. And, I was crossing through the hall one day and I ran into the CEO. I was like, hey, do you know how many tools we have in HubSpot's own stack? I showed him the list. He's like, he couldn't believe it. I mean, it's, in HubSpot, it's a decent sized company, about 4,000 people, but it's, there are much larger companies out there too. It is amazing, how many tools. And HubSpot's like a MarTech company, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. We use all of our own technology in wonderful ways, but there's just so many things out there that you can leverage that, most people's tech stacks are a lot larger than they believe.
Yeah, I think you can relate to that. There's some stuff that just becomes sort of subconscious. You're like, oh yeah, we use that thing, but we don't think about it. So it's, you don't think to mention it.
What's the tool we're using here to, broadcast this live?
Yes, we are using Switter Studio, which, again, is something that we just use. I probably wouldn't put it on a MarTech list, if I'm honest. Not the first time, at least. Maybe the second pass. Christoph, our producer, who's the man behind the curtain, will kill me for saying that live.
Sorry about that. It's my fault, Christoph.
But no, I mean, and the other thing I think that was really interesting that you were talking about is like from the customer perspective. I love a customer journey. I love a journey map. We just had a big meeting on this on Friday for our own internal journey mapping work. But I think what's interesting, like with a lot of the people that we speak to, whether they're in insights functions or customer experience functions, they're doing a lot of surveying and, talking to customers, interviews, focus groups, video surveys, whatever that might be. And thinking about how those tools fit into the customer journey, a lot of times I think that it's sort of thought of as being outside, like to inform the customer journey and to inform the experience design. But when you really start to think about the survey technology as being part of that journey, that is an experience in and of itself when you are surveying your customers or you're interviewing them and asking them questions. And so I think mapping that into the customer journey is a really interesting concept as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right that it's an incredibly important aspect of like the modern digital customer experience. And it's also one that people tend to underestimate. I think one of the reasons this came up on my radar was, a few years ago, like when SAP acquired Qualtrics, which I forget the number. I want to say, don't hold me to this. I want to say they acquired it for like $9 billion or something like this. And at the time, I thought highly of Qualtrics, but I'm like, well, wait a second. Aren't these folks mostly just, surveying, customers at different points, to understand what. And the truth is, even with that as its core, it's such a huge part, of what makes customer experience work. And so, music to my ears that, you're thinking about, those kinds of touch points throughout the journey as well, too. Particularly as people get into more and more digital, delivery of the actual product or service itself, to not treat customer surveys as, this sort of batch process that you do like, once a quarter we do, a survey and see what comes back, but to actually build those mechanisms into the experience so that you're getting that on a much more continuous basis. So powerful.
Yeah, totally. Apologies. I think I might be experiencing some background noise that I was trying to avoid, but we're going to power through it. So one of the other things you mentioned was about, rationalizing the tech stack that you have, right? Like, how do you prove the value of what you're using? What needs to go? What needs to stay? What kind of new things need to be brought in when you are kind of evaluating your how the tech is working with your customer needs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a question that's hard to quantify partly because there are two kinds of marketing technology. There is a marketing technology, there's a set of tools out there and services that tend to get very closely aligned with performance. So for instance, like if you're going to launch an influencer marketing program and you're going to do an influencer marketing tool, and you have a, goal for, a certain amount of, either traffic that's going to come to a consumer website or leads in a B2B site, whatever it is, like you can kind of put that in a bucket and say like, okay, well, our expense to like run this program and the technology for it was X, our expected return was Y, did we hit that, did we not, and those become things then that you can relatively easily say like, okay, this is an ROI decision, is it working for us or not? The challenge is there's a whole bunch of other technology we use in marketing that has a more indirect relationship to revenue. I mean, it's things like, our CRM, our project management system, if we're using, Slack as like our internal collaboration mechanism, these become things that we know they're an important part of us delivering our performing overall in marketing, but it's very, very hard to say like, oh, well, here's the relationship between my project management tool and what my, lead generation numbers were for, a particular month. You're like, yeah, and so this is why I think, you do have to sort of look at the sense of like, okay, what is the percentage of marketing's budget that I want to spend on infrastructure and capability? And luckily, there's enough data out there that you can actually benchmark yourself against, peers based on your size, even based on your industry. And you can sort of say like, oh, okay, well, companies that are, very performant, with their MarTech, they might be spending 15% of their budget, on those technologies. And then this is, the performance they're getting relative to someone who might be spending 30%, of their budget on MarTech, but their actual, performance, again, on like metrics of, leads or customer acquisition, is falling short. And so it's a little more complicated than it should be, but the absolute goal there of saying like, listen, I'm not just going to buy stuff, for the sake of buying it. I am holding myself accountable, to being able to use this technology to deliver, marketing's value. If you don't do that, then, well, someone else comes in as the CMO.
Yeah. That's so true. I think, this might be a little bit of a side note tangent, but what becomes really challenging as a marketer and I'm going to eat my own words because, at Box Pop Me, we're a subscription business. But, when you're a month into a new, it's not working and you are trapped. And so maybe that comes into the evaluation piece of, we talked about the 80-20 rule. You should be like maximizing the value of the tech that you're using, but also staying up to date on what's new that's going to add value to your stack. Like, how do you go about evaluating new tech that you're considering adding to your stack that you don't end up in a place where you're not getting value from something you've spent a lot of money on?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best ways to do it is to just go out into the world as a bit of an anthropological effort and look at how other companies, what they're doing. I mean, again, like, I've been now on so many different, virtual event and podcasting platforms over the past year. And it's actually, I love it because I've probably seen now and experienced like 40 different tools. And I'm like, oh, wow, I really like this one for this feature. There's this other thing I think is amazing what it's doing. And then I can go and I can look at them and say, well, this one costs this much and this other one costs 5 times as much, And so just going out into the world. I mean, we I've always talked for a long time about marketers need to spend more time with customers, which is absolutely true. You just have to understand your audience as like the number one mission, the prime directive, as they say in Star Trek. I think also because there's just so much technology that's being innovated and experimented with, to allocate more time to just experience what it's like for what other marketing groups are doing. It doesn't even have to be competitive. In fact, actually, it can sometimes be better if it's not competitive, because you're looking to find these ideas that haven't yet broken within your competitive set, because you might be the first one to be able to pull that in and say, I haven't seen something like this yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess as you're kind of evaluating this new tech and bringing it in from what you see in the marketplace, like, how do you ultimately determine this is a success, or, chalk it up to a failed experiment and move on?
Yeah, so I'm definitely a big believer in treating almost every MarTech, and we'll put an asterisk here and come back to it, but almost every piece of MarTech as a trial. That basically you want to say, okay, I'm going to do it for this period of time, and I actually have very specific use cases in mind. I have very specific ideas I want to try, and it's so important to have that clarity, partly just so when you're evaluating the tool before you even purchase, you're able to, not just sit there and watch the canned demo, but you're able to go to the, sales organization and, say, okay, I've got some very specific questions for you. This is what I would like to do with your tool. Can you show me specifically how I would do that? Because you don't want to wait until like after you sign the agreement to figure out, so that's what it's going to take to actually do this. I didn't see that in the demo. So that's the first step of it. But yeah, if you then go into it and it's like, okay, whatever it is, a 3-month, a 6-month, 12-month, depends on, the nature of the technology and just, what ramp up and delivery time, you should expect for that, but have a finite period of time and say, okay, these are the use cases. This is how we're expecting to perform it. If you can attach it to, a correlation to some sort of metric, okay, well, we actually expect by using this, we're going to see this sort of a bump in, conversion from web traffic, to qualified leads. Like, have those metrics, even if they're correlated metrics, it's important to just be tracking that. But even in the cases where you can't always have a really strong correlating metric, such as maybe with, like a project management tool or something like that, to make it part of your evaluation process of like, okay, all the people who are using this tool, like, we're going to ask them what their expectations were at the beginning. We're going to check in with them through the process. Like, what are you liking about this? What are you not liking about it? How much time do you spend on this? And that, again, you do this in enough of a scientific way that when you get to the end of the trial period, you've actually got some like real data that you can put on the table and say, was this a success or not by the metrics we originally wanted to hold it to.
I think that's so important, like, not just the kind of entry period, whatever it is, 30 days, 90 days, but knowing before you go into it what success is going to look like and not deviating from that. Because if it's very easy to kind of say, we're going to trial this for 90 days and see how it goes. But if you haven't defined ahead of time what good looks like, what bad looks like, then you get to the end of the 90 days and it could just be like, oh yeah, that was fine. That seemed fine. I had a perfectly fine experience. But I think it's so important, that combination, and really identifying ahead of time and also getting everybody on board. These are the metrics that we're measuring against. Is everybody clear on that? And then, so everyone is kind of in agreement of whether or not you achieved your goals with that trial or not.
Yep. And the thing that gets more challenging, I said we'd put an asterisk by this, is this works really well anytime you're doing a piece of technology that isn't your core platform, but when you're doing things like your core platform, like your CRM or your, digital experience platform, CMS or something like that, those are things that are actually much harder to try. You might get a free trial, you might experiment with it in a sandbox, but because it's such an infrastructure-oriented capability, like once you decide to adopt something like that, you're kind of all in. And so for those kinds of purchases, it probably goes without saying, but let's just say it anyways. I mean, the evaluation process before you buy needs to be about 10 times more rigorous, than when like, oh, well, I'm trying this new podcasting tool. I mean, hey, listen, if the podcasting tool doesn't work out, okay, well, I, blew a few $100, but, I'm okay. But yeah, you switch your like content management platform system, and the website starts failing in all sorts of bad ways, then yeah, well, again, that's the sort of case where, all of a sudden there's a new CMO. So you want to be much more rigorous in the evaluation of those technologies.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is probably one of those scenarios where I know for our own experience, when we were thinking about switching our CRM, it was talking to people internally who at previous roles had worked with different CRMs and, playing on other people's experience or talking to other people in the industry who are using different, because you're right. You just you can't trial a CRM. You just can't.
I mean, you can do something in a sandbox, but yeah, it's like, those are one of those things you like switch on. So yeah. and I love that. Yeah. I mean, talking with your peers is such a powerful thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a bit of a, what I call it, like an armchair analyst, so I don't do it for a living, but I play one on TV. And as much respect as I have for the analyst industry, the truth is, they're never going to be able to give you the same sort of perspective that people and trust who have actually gone through that experience themselves, who say, listen, forget about what's published on the web. I'm going to tell you what really happened. And this was the good, this was the bad, this was the ugly. That sort of information is so valuable, which I'll be honest, this is one of the reasons I'm really excited to see, events in the marketing and MarTech space start to come back in person, because for all the wonderful virtual events that we've had, one of the things that sort of got lost in that process was that sort of time in the halls or at the bar at the hotel at night, where you could just sort of have these like informal discussions, with your peers. So much actual real information about the reality, of marketing and MarTech, pass through those channels. And it's definitely something that I feel we'd lost in our, virtual bubble over the past years. So I think, I for one will be very excited to get back to that.
I hear you. I know a lot of people are very excited to get back. And, before we wrap up, since you brought it up, the in-person events, I'm dying to hear what your thoughts are on in-person events for the remainder of this year. And do you think people will really be back? I know they're happening, but when are people going to really go to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's unfortunately hard to prognosticate just because, I think every time we think we've got our arms around the public health situation, there's good news here, there's concerns over there, certainly where you are in the world at this point in time, it's a very spiky, state. So yes, I'm sure we'll see some events coming back here in the second half of this year. My suspicion is it probably will be 2022 before this really starts happening at scale. And yeah, keeping our fingers crossed, obviously, not just for the sake of marketing events, but just for the sake of the world as itself. It will be such a wonderful thing to get past, this challenge that everyone's been wrestling with for the past year and a half. So, yeah. My fingers are crossed, knock on wood, 2022.
I know, it does feel like there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, so hopefully we're getting close. But I can't thank you enough. This has been a really great conversation, so really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the wonderful spring outdoors.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for joining us today. Don't forget to rate and review our show wherever you listen to podcasts. Next week, I'm going to be joined by Gilad Barash of Distillery, and I look forward to seeing you then.